So I want to begin, talking about for the love of life, by talking a little bit about renewable energy, especially from solar and wind, which has become the fastest growing and cheapest energy in the world. In their new book, Abundance, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson explain this trend by summarizing it, or I should say summarizing a recent study. They say, in a thrilling paper with the very unthrilling title, Empirically Grounded Technology Forecast and the Energy Transition, I'm sure you've read that one, a team of researchers found that the price of oil, gas, and coal, after adjusting for inflation, is about what it was 140 years ago. But renewable energy keeps crushing expectations. The authors looked at 2,905 projections for solar costs made by the most popular forecasting models and found that solar costs were expected to fall by 2.6% a year and never more than 6%. In reality, they fell by 15% a year, year after year. 15%. In 2022, the U.S. Energy Information Administration released a report estimating life cycle cost for new energy installations in the coming decades. Solar was already cheaper than natural gas. Wind was $1 more. Both were about half the price of coal. A world powered by renewable energy is barreling towards us like a solar-powered freight train, and will be here before we know it, despite the naysayers and the Neanderthals standing on the tracks hoping to stop it. In The Singularity is Nearer, Ray Kurzweil says, as a result of these ongoing cost reductions, the overall amount of energy obtained from renewable sources, solar, wind, geothermal, tidal, and biofuels, is also growing exponentially. Globally, the cost reductions of solar energy in particular is doubling much faster than other renewable sources, just under every 28 months from 1983 to 2021, right? Doubling each year. Doing the math, Kurzweil says, from 3.6% in 2021, it would take only about 4.8 doublings to reach 100%, which would put us at 2032 to meet all of our energy needs from solar alone. 2032, that's just a few years away. It's an astonishing statement, especially if you're only looking at solar from a U.S. perspective, where it's being resisted by those currently in power with evangelical passion. A 2023 report by the International Energy Agency says, while the increases in renewable capacity in Europe, the United States, and Brazil hit all-time highs, China's acceleration was extraordinary. In 2023, China commissioned as much solar power as the entire world did in 2022, while its wind additions also grew by 66% year on year. Globally, solar PV alone accounts for 3/4 of renewable capacity additions worldwide. So despite all of the U.S.'s fear-mongering about China, the sleeping giant has awakened and it has hit the ground running. In addition to having more than 23,000 miles of high-speed rail, compared to 0 in the U.S., almost 65% of the world's electric cars compared to 1% in the U.S., AI-embodied robots already, and drones that can deliver your lunch or a cup of coffee from the sky. China, not the U.S., or any other Western nation, is the world's leader on combating climate change. In fact, if it weren't for China, solar power wouldn't be affordable for anyone right now. Despite the U.S. having invented solar technology in the 1950s, it is China that made it an affordable market. As Klein and Thompson explained in 2000, not too long ago, China had barely enough solar energy to power a small town. By 2020, the nation was making 70% of the world's photovoltaic panels. And China ramped up manufacturing. As China ramped up manufacturing, the cost of solar panels in the last 15 years has declined by almost 90%. Right? That's why those of us like myself, fortunate enough to have solar panels on our roofs, can afford them. I don't mind them saying made in China on the back. I agree actually with that great line from a John Denver song, "Who's to say you have to lose for someone else to win?" I want my neighbors around the world. I want my brothers and sisters in China to win. China is not leaving the U.S. in its dust. The U.S. is leaving itself in China's dust. Just this past week, in his reckless and short-sighted efforts to make America great again, Donald Trump ordered the Environmental Protection Agency to stop regulating greenhouse gas emissions. In other words, to stop doing its job. Trump wants to make the U.S. dependent on coal, oil, and gas again, even as the rest of the world is passing us by, along with all the new green energy jobs other countries, especially China, will have access to. According to the IEA report, 30 million clean energy jobs will be gained by the end of this decade, compared to only 5 million lost by the deadly and dying fossil fuel industry. That's a net gain of 25 million jobs. And if the U.S. continues down the path of nationalism and isolationism that it is on, it is unlikely that it will enjoy any of the benefits of this booming industry. Now, I've begun by discussing renewable energy to such an extent because it is a very real and cogent example of the choice that we are facing today between life or death. Solar, wind, and water are the energies of life, while coal, oil, and gas are the destructive energies made from the buried remains of dead animals. In 2017, Noam Chomsky, professor emeritus of MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, drew a lot of heat by claiming that the Republican Party is the most dangerous organization in human history. He argued this is mostly so because of its refusal to do anything about or let anyone else do anything about global warming, the worst existential crisis humanity has ever faced. I agree that's a very outrageous statement, Chomsky told journalist Amy Goodman. So I therefore simply suggest that you take a look at the facts and see if it has any merit or if it should just be bitterly condemned. Has there ever been an organization in human history that is dedicated with such commitment to the destruction of organized human life on Earth? Of course, the grand old party likes to portray itself as the pro-life party because of its concern for unborn people, which, given its otherwise dismal anti-life record, can only be understood as a form of denial and deflection. Just this past week, there was another mass shooting involving a U.S. civilian using a military-style assault rifle. At the same time, NBC reported on a new drone system that uses pepper spray and other non-lethal tools to track down and incapacitate potential school shooters. That's great, I initially thought. But then I wondered, why do we have to depend on such technology to begin with, when, like any other sane country, we can simply ban civilians from owning these unnecessary weapons? We can't, because here in the U.S., our society has mostly chosen death over life. Unabated global warming may be the worst example of this, and the mass shootings the most horrific, but there are many others. The U.S. is the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't provide adequate health care to its citizens, including all those unborn babies before and after their births. During the height of the COVID pandemic, the GOP resisted sheltering at home and wearing masks in public to prevent its deadly spread, and has since worked to cast false doubt on the safety and efficacy of all vaccines, resulting in new outbreaks of diseases that we had previously defeated, like polio and the measles. In recent months, weeks, and even days, the Republican administration has continued to diminish and end environmental agencies and protections, and has rapidly discontinued domestic and foreign aid programs to those most in need in the U.S. and around the world. It's also backing away from offering disaster relief for the almost constant barrage now of hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and fires caused by the climate change that it still refuses to acknowledge is even happening. But hey, we got the borders handled. Instead of compassionately addressing the growing housing shortage that's putting working Americans out on our streets, the Trump administration's solution is to simply remove them. To where? We do not know. Perhaps to some foreign gulag. Instead of treating immigrants with respect and dignity, everyone who even looks like they might perhaps be from a foreign country must now fear for themselves and their families. Only a couple of days ago, perhaps in response to the South Park episode recently ridiculing his male prowess, Trump sent 2 nuclear submarines, talk about phallic symbols, to threaten Russia, rather than working to de-escalate the possibility of the nuclear war that he promised would occur if he wasn't elected. And let's add making paper straws illegal, just to be mean, and outlawing cultivated meat that would eliminate the suffering of animals to this unsavory list of destructive actions. However else we might define these behaviors, they cannot be considered the actions of a party or a nation that is pro-life, but of a people, organization, society, or what have you that, as Noam Chomsky says, is at the very least among the most dangerous organizations in human history. Now, this is not to say that all Republicans, nor all who voted for Republicans, have a necrophilous or death-centered orientation. To assume otherwise is to commit the informal fallacy of division, confusing qualities attributed to the whole with those of its individual members. So although people will accuse me of saying that all Republicans are necrophiles, that's not what I'm saying. Nor am I implying that everyone who votes for Democrats in the U.S. have a life-directed or biophilous orientation. Some of the most loathsome people I know are Democrats. Necrophilia is rooted, rather, in the failure of some individuals to fully emerge from their original narcissism, the experience of ourselves as the entire world, which should dissipate if and as we differentiate ourselves from our mothers. And if for some reason we cannot let go of that original feeling of oneness, we find a surrogate mother, be it a person, a group, a religion, a nationality, or the like. So I've discussed how this is manifesting on the right. On the left, it has manifested as cancel culture, wokeness, political correctness, or whatever you want to call it, and is characterized by losing oneself in one's sense of identity or as reverence for the identity of others. As with one's looks, one's body, one's wealth, defining oneself by one's identity rather than one's creativity and one's accomplishments, especially those that make a positive difference in the world, is narcissistic. It becomes malignant narcissism as soon as it ventures into authoritarianism by demanding that everyone else recognize and revere our identity as much as we do. Right? Billions of people have to see the world as we do, effectively making oneself the whole world again. To require everyone in the world to use language or see things exactly as we do, or to claim that we've been harmed when we hear things we disagree with, is extremely narcissistic. It's not social justice. So if you think I've been too hard on Republicans, let me state explicitly that this is precisely what I believe has become of many liberal institutions to their detriment, including segments of the Democratic Party, and has completely overtaken our very religion, Unitarian Universalism, which now attacks, the leadership at least of which now attacks the character and livelihoods of anyone who resists or disagrees with it. Just a couple of weeks ago, the UU Association disfellowshipped yet another minister, one who had served for the better part of 3 decades, accusing her of being an abusive bully. Between 1961 and 2020, do the math, the UUA had permanently removed only 8 ministers from fellowship, that is, stripping them of their professional credentials. 7 of those were for sexual misconduct and 1 for financial malfeasance, and they should have been. Since 2020, when I became the first minister to have the honor of being disfellowshipped for being a non-cooperative, abusive bully, after writing a book of dissenting views, they have disfellowshipped 7 others for the same or similar reasons as me, especially for saying something that somebody at the UUA disagrees with. That's as many removed in the past 5 years as were removed over a period of decades. To disregard the freedoms of others in order to sustain one's narcissistic wish to be the whole world is anti-life, and it exists on both the left and the right today. And this is so of both extremes, or I should say that this is so of both extremes, should not be surprising, given that the choice between necrophilia and biophilia is perhaps the most common human dilemma, regardless of our politics, our identities, or anything else. Nor is it a decision that we just make once, but every day, every vote, every action. As social psychologist Eric Fromm says, every second is a moment of decision for the better or for the worse. Fortunately, he also says that our primary orientation is toward life, not death, which makes sense if you think about it, given that the drive to live is the primary instinct of all living things, of all living beings. Again, it is only when we fail to fully differentiate ourselves from the world, enabling us then to fully unfold as individuals, that our narcissism leads to necrophilia, characterized by authoritarianism, destruction, and decay, if not death itself. What is true of the individual, as we have seen, becomes true of society, especially if it's widespread enough to put malignant narcissists into power, leading to the sorts of consequences I've already outlined. In addition to oppressive and destructive behaviors, this orientation is unable to create or to advance. For it is life that is defined by birth and growth and creativity, not death. But a necrophilous society doesn't simply sit still. Unable to progress, it has no choice but to regress. Fromm says, if it does not grow, it decays. If it does not transcend the status quo for the better, it changes for the worse. The moment we stand still, we begin to decay. Life has to progress. It has to move forward. This decay, however, is evidenced by the underfunded and outdated public schools across the U.S., as well as its unkept and failing national infrastructures like roadways, highways, and bridges. Along, of course, with its inability to build, not only its inability to care for existing structures, but to create, to build, to advance new structures, like those high-speed rails in China I mentioned. We cannot make anything great by simply dismantling. By simply dismantling the government, brandishing chainsaws, and shouting, cut, 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 cut. We have to create. Life that stagnates tends to die, Fromm says. If the stagnation is complete, death has occurred. As necessary as it is to discuss the negative consequences of this death orientation in order to understand what we're up against, I hope you have taken note of three very positive points that I've made. First, the energy that has always created and sustained life is winning. Despite all that the GOP is now Trump are doing to stop the green energy revolution, they are failing and will at most only succeed in putting the U.S. behind the times on its continued path towards insignificance. Sad a thought as that is. 2, the choice between life and death, between biophilia and necrophilia, is always before us. Every second, meaning just because we've made bad choices in the past doesn't mean we have to make bad choices in the future. Once we recognize its qualities, we can choose life. Thirdly, choosing life is our primary instinct, meaning it is the natural choice for us to make. In short, life is winning, and most of us want it to win. What then are the qualities that define this biophilous orientation? To answer this, I'll begin with a full paragraph from Fromm's The Anatomy of Human Destructiveness. He says, biophilia is the passionate love of life and all that is alive. It is the wish to further growth, whether in a person, a plant, an idea, or a social group. The biophilous person prefers to construct rather than retain. He wants to be more rather than to have more. He's capable of wondering, and he prefers to see something new rather than to find confirmation of the old. He loves the adventure of living more than he does certainty. He sees the whole rather than only the parts, structures rather than summations. He wants to mold and to influence by love, reason, and example, not by force, by cutting things apart. by the bureaucratic manner of administrating people as if they were things, will just remove them. Because he enjoys life in all its manifestations. In this description, we find the very opposite of the authoritarian, destructive, unproductive necrophilous orientation. The love of life promotes freedom, creativity, and progress for the individual and for society. Elsewhere from defines love as the sense of responsibility, care, respect, knowledge of all that we love. He hence describes biophilic ethics to mean good is all that serves life. Evil is all that serves death. Good is reverence for life, all that enhances life, growth, unfolding. Evil is that which stifles life, narrows it down, cuts it into pieces. Today we're seeing the consequences of our necrophilous choices in pronounced, frightening, and destructive ways. But the choice is still before us every second, giving us another opportunity to choose for the better rather than for the worse. So rather than fearing the future by stifling progress and stifling life itself, we have the chance to create a life-affirming future for the whole world. Let's choose a world in which we recycle our swords by turning them into plowshares, our nuclear submarines into vessels that clean our polluted oceans. And let's replace the guns on our streets with enough food and housing and health care and modern schoolhouses to nourish and nurture and unlock the full potential of every boy and girl. Instead of investing trillions in the war machine while begrudging what few dollars are spent on any public service, let's happily invest in the well-being of our citizens, no matter who they are or where they are from. Instead of pretending we care about humanity by saving the unborn, let's care for freedom, safety, well-being of all people, no matter where they are born. Instead of fearing, hating, demonizing, and ruining the lives of those we disagree with, let's at the very least live and let live. Until by living peacefully together we come to recognize our common humanity and then discover our love for one another. Rather than being left even further behind, let's choose to become real leaders in the world by becoming good partners who are helping to advance clean energy so that we can all begin healing the earth. The slogan, "Choose Life," cannot be limited only to those who don't exist yet, or only for those who look, think, and act like us. It is the choice that is always before all of us every second to make things better, not worse, for the lives of the world and the world that is already here before us, needing our love. Did I say love? I meant needing our responsibility, our care, our respect, our understanding, because that's what the love of life is. Choosing freedom, creativity, and growth by making a positive difference in the lives of other people, other creatures, and the earth itself, which is the living mother of us all, and truly is the whole world. Thank you.